cat geckos are interesting because they're very sensitive to minerals and such. You can't even use tap water for them. You have to use RO water because they're just so sensitive to the minerals. So I found that supplementing them is quite challenging because too much supplements and they start developing bladder stones. So even just supplementing them with calcium, I found to be a bit of a challenge. So giving them feeders like isopods that are already just high in calcium, I think is really great for them to just make time for it. But it took me about 2 months to complete. And these enclosures were 6 feet tall, they're 5 feet wide and 3 feet deep. I took Felix and I put him into Fiona's enclosure, and just right away I was mind blown because he started head bobbing at her and just like all of the signs that you want to see right away.
Welcome to episode number 109 of the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dyllon and thank you so much for tuning in today. Today I'm speaking with another Canadian content creator, that is Emma Sampson. I'm sure you're familiar with her channel. She just surpassed 100,000 subscribers about a month ago now. Her YouTube channel is Emma Lynn Sampson. I'm sure you've also seen her on Instagram as well. In this episode, we start off by discussing Emma's cross-country move from Ottawa, Canada, all the way back to Nova Scotia, her hometown, with over 50 reptiles. So, as you know, I've just recently moved with 6 reptiles, and that was stressful enough. So she tells us all about how she managed to do it with 50 animals. It's pretty incredible. Then we talk about her journey on YouTube, why she started and how she has evolved over time, and also just some of the stresses of being a content creator on YouTube. As a viewer, some of the things you may not be aware of. So we discuss kind of how that feels as a content creator. And then we get into a little bit more specifics as far as some of the breeding projects she has on the go with the Cat Geckos and Parson's Chameleons. We talk about that. We talk about their basic care for each species and how the breeding projects are going. And finally, we wrap up the conversation discussing Emma's new business venture. That was part of the reason why she moved back to Nova Scotia. So she talks about the idea that she has and how she's going to expand on it in the future. It is a great episode, and as always, I love talking to another Canadian, so I do hope you enjoy it. So before we jump into the episode, as always, let's go through our housekeeping. There's first 2 announcements that I want to make before we get into the usual housekeeping things. The first is, you may be aware that we hit 10,000 subscribers on this channel. I forgot to mention it last episode. We did that about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. Thank you so much for all the support. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel yet and you want to simply show your support, that is the easiest way to do that. Go to the YouTube channel, hit subscribe. I'm so happy that we hit 10,000. It's really amazing that many people are interested in pushing the hobby forward. So thank you so much for joining the channel, following along, and subscribing. The second thing is, on that note, the bad news is next week, which I think is November 14th, I will not be putting an episode of the podcast out, so we're going to have 1 week gap after this episode. I may still try to get a video out, just some of the work that I did with my day gecko enclosure over the summer that I haven't edited the content yet, so I may have a chance to edit that, but I know I'm not going to have a chance to edit an entire podcast episode next week. And then after that, I think the 21st, we'll get back into normal programming. I have some amazing episodes coming up as well, so you will not want to miss those. If you are interested in learning more about the podcast, make sure you head to animalsathomenetwork.com. There you'll find the show notes for everything. You can also find links to the shop where you can buy yourself an Animals at Home t-shirt or sweater. If you would like to join us on Patreon, head to patreon.com/animalsathome. There you can find early access to episodes, and you have the option to submit questions to upcoming guests. And finally, thank you so much to CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. If you're looking for brand new reptile-related equipment, hit the affiliate links in both the YouTube description or the show notes. A small commission will come back to me if you do make a purchase, but that is at no extra cost to you. And I think that's everything. Let's jump into the show. Enjoy. Well, Emma, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Definitely looking forward to chatting with another reptile or Canadian reptile creator. And you just did a fairly significant cross-country move. So why don't we start with, well, actually, before we get there, first, I better congratulate you on hitting 100,000 subscribers.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was
amazing.
Just happened right after the move. So it was really exciting, good timing. So thank you.
And you actually got there relatively quickly, actually. As I was doing research for this episode, I wasn't sure how long you'd been on YouTube, but it's actually only been 3 years, basically.
Yeah, coming up on 4 now. I started in October of 2017. So yeah, 4 years now, pretty much exactly.
So yeah, that's pretty quick to hit 100K.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, tell me a little bit about the move. You moved from Ottawa to Nova Scotia, so there's a lot of people listening that have never heard either of those two words before.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk about how that went and how far that drive is and what it was like to move that many animals.
Yeah, so this is actually the second time I've done a significant move like that because I am from Nova Scotia, which is, pretty much the very east coast of Canada. 2 years ago, I moved from Nova Scotia to Ottawa. I lived there for 2 years. And then just recently, I moved back to Nova Scotia, which took us 18 hours to do the drive.
Oh, that is a monster drive. So what did you rent a U-Haul or what did you do?
So thankfully, I had a lot of help with my family. So we rented a big U-Haul, standard moving truck. And then my dad and my mom both drove up to Ottawa to help with this and everything. So my dad was the one driving the U-Haul and my mom drove her SUV up. And then, of course, I had my car there as well. So we had a total of 3 vehicles coming back with us. So all of the furniture, the animals, the enclosures, all of that was all just split throughout those 3 vehicles.
So how did you move the animals? Obviously, you pulled most of them out of their enclosures, I'm sure, unless some of the smaller ones. And then did you stop along the way or how did that work?
So moving the animals is definitely the most challenging part because, you're dealing with live animals and you don't want them to be in their travel containers and stuff for too long. You want them in their enclosures as long as possible, but you don't want to move them in their enclosures because there's so much space. If they're in a bumpy truck, the animals could go flying around in their enclosure, decorations and stuff. Who knows what could happen? So we take all the animals out of their enclosure and we put them in travel bins, which all of the travel bins, they're large enough to comfortably fit the animal, but there's not a ton of empty space that the animal could go flying around if you hit a bump in the road. So the night before we left, we started packing up all the animals. I had 6 of my friends helping. So we had a total of 8 people there packing up all of my animals, and it still took us 6 hours.
Oh my gosh.
So it took us a long time to pack up all the animals. And then once the animals were packed in their containers, we then had to start packing all of the enclosures into the moving truck. So all of the enclosures were getting brought out to the truck as the animals were getting removed from them. And then all the animals were left in their travel bins, which then got loaded into bigger bins to kind of hold everything nice and secure. And then those got loaded into the SUV. Wow. And then we drove 18 hours with them all.
Did you make just pit stops? You didn't stop for a night or anything? You just went straight?
Yeah, we drove straight through. We stopped for gas a few times. We stopped for food, but we didn't really make any stops longer than half an hour.
It's so crazy. I mean, for listeners know, and as well, that I also just moved and literally it was 15 minutes down the road and I was still stressful. It's so stressful moving animals. Every little bump you hit, you're like, oh my God, does that freak them out? Yeah. So I can't imagine 18 hours on the road with that many animals too.
It's a lot and it's a lot of stress. Everyone is just feeling it, even, everyone around me is feeling the stress. They're dealing with the animals. They're dealing with me, who's probably the most stressed out about everything. And, we had so little sleep during that time as well. I mean, the drive was 18 hours and we were awake all day before that and pretty much all night as well, taking care of things. So it's not a fun day or two.
Lots of coffee needed.
Yeah, and see, I'm not even a coffee drinker or anything.
So he just did waters the whole way?
Oh yeah, pretty much.
That's crazy. And then the worst part is once you're done all that, you're not done because you get to the house where you've moved and all the unloading has to happen. Exactly.
So we timed it well where, actually I guess we tried to time it well, but we didn't really stay on schedule very well. But we timed it so that my dad left with the moving truck a couple hours before we left with the animals. So he actually arrived in Nova Scotia way before us. So because he got here with the truck, they were able to start unloading that and getting the enclosures, out of the truck into the house. So then when we got here with the animals, they were mostly ready for the animals to go in. So that saved a lot of time, but it was still like 3 or 4 hours of unpacking once we got here.
Yeah. Well, I was really amazed how quickly you had everything set up again. It seemed like you just moved and all of a sudden the rooms were set back up. And I'm like, man, I feel bad. I had like 6 animals and it took me a long time. But I guess if you had a good assembly line process in place.
Yeah, we did. And as far as like the enclosures go, I didn't tear them down or anything. I left all of my enclosures as is. Basically, all I did was I removed any heavy things out of them before the move, water bowls, rocks, anything that could maybe shift around and possibly break an enclosure. But as far as the substrate, the plants and everything goes, I just left everything there.
Yeah, that's probably smart. And then there was something else I was going to ask you about that, but I'll come back to it. I'll remember. You've moved into what I think I understand is your old childhood home. You grew up in the house.
Yeah, yeah, I did. So
how does that feel to be back there?
It's interesting. This room I'm in right now was my bedroom for 18 years of my life. And now it's sort of my animal/YouTube room, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's probably nice to have, I'm sure you have some extra space too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's
cool.
a lot more space.
Awesome. Well, why don't we dial back a little bit and figure out how you got into this mess of animals that you're in right now? So can you give me a little bit of background? Where did your passion and interest for just animals or reptiles in general come from?
Yeah, see, I can't really pinpoint it to anything. I just remember when I was a kid that I just loved animals. I loved finding them outside. I always thought that they were so fascinating. And particularly, I was interested in, reptiles, amphibians, and insects. However, here in, kind of Canada in general, but especially Nova Scotia, we have like no reptiles here. There's a total of 5 species of snake in Nova Scotia. There's no lizards or anything, and there's a few turtles. But here, especially in the city, you rarely ever see anything. So finding a snake or something when I was a kid was a pretty rare occurrence, but it was always just super exciting. I always wanted to find a snake when I went out. I did find a lot of salamanders and frogs and stuff, though, so I was really into them. And I was also really into caterpillars. I loved finding caterpillars and like raising them into butterflies. I was super into that. Oh,
so it started young.
Yeah. And see, like, I can't really point it to like, none of my parents are super into animals. I didn't really watch a lot of like animal like TV or anything either when I was a kid. It was just sort of one of those natural passions that I had.
What species of snake are in Nova Scotia? There's, I'm sure, a couple garter snakes, maybe a red belly.
Garter snakes, ringneck snakes. There's the green ribbon. It's not the green ribbon. Some green snake, like
a rough green snake or smooth.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly. I'm not great. I'm not great with native species, honestly.
I know it's the same as here because you never see them. Like we do have them in Manitoba, but you literally never see them except for the red-sided garter snakes. But other than that, it's just you see them in books maybe.
Yeah, no, like seeing a snake around here is maybe something that would happen every 2 years for me. And this is even like me as a child who was looking for them, and I would still only find one every 2 years, maybe one a year. So
yeah, it's about the same here. So then as a career path, it looks like you decided to, like, besides YouTube, you decided to go down an animal-centered career. So what were you thinking at the end of high school or going into university? I'm not sure if you went to university, but did you have, you did. So you can go from I think you understand the question.
Yeah, I was sort of completely lost for a while. When I was in high school in my last year in grade 12, I thought I had a plan, and I was actually accepted into makeup school. I was going to do a global makeup artistry program. So it wasn't just like, wedding prom type makeup. It was like special effects stuff. That's what I was interested in. And I was planning to move to Vancouver to go to the school and do this program. And then I just sort of decided I didn't want to do that anymore. It didn't feel right. I don't know exactly what led me to that decision, but I just decided not to. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew that I liked animals. So I I then signed up for school in a marine biology program. And then again, I very quickly realized that it was not what I wanted to do. It just wasn't for me. I just wasn't enjoying it at all. So I kind of just left school and I was feeling really lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I started my YouTube channel because I liked animals. I had a lot of free time. I liked talking about my animals. I liked watching other animal videos. So it just felt like, why not do it?
Yeah.
And so I started there, and that's kind of where my channel came from.
What animals did you start keeping? What reptiles did you start keeping to begin with?
Yeah. So I kept pets basically my whole life, even like as a child. My parents were fairly supportive of having pets in the house. So when I was 7 years old, we got an African fat-tail gecko. So that was the first reptile I ever had. And then when I was 14, I got a leopard gecko. And out of all the animals I have now, the very first reptile here was my ball python? I think it was one of my ball python. No, it was my crested gecko.
Okay, so and I think, I don't know if we mentioned, but you have about 50. Is that your number? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the exact count right now, honestly, but it's around there.
So I wanted to spend some time on the YouTube channel itself because it is a really interesting, I think you were probably early on in that sort of pet tube era almost. And that's sort of, I want to say like 5 years ago that barely existed. And then a few channels started a few years ago and they sort of exploded. And I think you were definitely part of that wave. Were you aware of that wave when you started or how did that?
I would say sort of, yeah. Like I said, before I started my channel, I did enjoy watching other pet-related, animal-related content on YouTube. So I was familiar with a lot of other channels in the, in the space. And I sort of, again, I was introduced to it in 2017 and I guess I really saw it kind of just take off from there as a YouTube genre.
Yeah, because it is amazing how quickly that sector of YouTube went from 0 to 1,000 over just like a couple of months.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
So over that time, I'm sure you've evolved sort of the philosophy of your channel or just your overall mission. So how have things changed for you with the channel and just your approach?
Yeah, I think things have changed a lot, not only just, with the experience of being on YouTube for a while, but also like I was 18 when I started my channel. So I think I also just as a person have changed and, I've learned a lot, especially about animals and reptiles and all that stuff. So I think a lot has changed, but overall I think the main focus of my channel has kind of remained the same. My channel was never really meant to be anything specific other than just me sharing my life with my animals. And I kind of feel like that's still the main goal. I've definitely, as I've just learned more and been in the space for a while, I do like to incorporate more educational content and more important messages and stuff, I think, in my content. But overall, it's just me documenting my life with the animals that I have and the experiences that I have.
Well, and it seems like from an outsider perspective, and maybe I'm not sure if you feel the same way, it seems just even the quality of, and not saying the quality of care was a bit poor or bad to begin with, but now you have such high standards of care, it seems like.
Yeah.
And it seems like you're starting to promote that more, and which is great because I think sometimes pet tubers get stuck in, providing the skeleton care sheet, and we kind of get stuck into this loop where you are now really pushing, really high quality care across the board pretty much.
And see, that's something I've always been interested in. When I first started keeping animals, I don't think many people start off by keeping animals in beautiful bioactive setups that, they put so much time and effort into, not really many people start that way. But it was always something that I was interested in as soon as I kind of learned about it. I was into animal keeping, I had my pets and stuff, but I didn't really know about the whole pet community. And I'm not just talking about like YouTube, but like Facebook groups and all that stuff too. I really started to discover that in 2017. And so I saw other people posting live planted setups, bioactive setups. And I just thought that it was so cool. I thought, the more you could replicate nature in your animal's environment, it just kind of made sense to me that that's going to be ideal for them in most cases. And, obviously I think there are exceptions. I've learned a lot, but it was just so fascinating to me and it just seemed right. So it was always something that I was interested in from the start. So it was something that I have, continued to just research and learn about ever since I first started keeping animals.
One of I think the dangers of being a pet YouTuber or a YouTuber that promote or has content surrounded around animals is that cycle of buying new animals and getting into that perpetual cycle where you're having to buy new animals so you can produce content and undo the unboxing and do the care video. And you see this all the time on YouTube where you have a younger person end up having 50 animals, and it's because they're pushing towards content. Do you feel like you ever got stuck into that, or were you aware of that ever?
I was definitely aware of that. And so for me, I had like 20 pets before I started my YouTube channel. So for me, it was just sort of like, this is just, this is what I do. I am someone who has a lot of animals. This is what I enjoy doing. It's what I enjoy dedicating my time to. So for me, it never felt like it was any content related thing. I think, whether it's content related or not, though, I think anyone can still sort of get stuck in that mindset of, needing a new pet as soon as your last one has gotten old, per se. But for me, I don't know. I don't really feel like I felt a lot of that. Out of all the animals I have, like I have barely ever rehomed any of my animals too. So they really are a lifetime commitment for me as much as I can. I want to do the best I can to provide for these animals for their whole lives. So it's not something I have really just take lightly, even as someone who does have a lot of animals. Mm-hmm.
Well, and just the stress of caring for that many animals too. That is a lot to manage. Yeah.
And, I see a lot of people talk about how, you'll get a new animal for the video and for the content and it's all that. And it's like, this animal cost me hundreds of dollars and is going to take hours and hours and hours of my life. And I maybe made $30 from the video about this animal.
There is a big disconnect between what the viewer sees and what the creator has to go through, right? And I think as somebody who's watching pet tubing videos, it can be very exciting. Like, wow, that seems like such a great life, especially if you've turned it into some, close to a full-time, income. Like, they get to take care of their animals and film a video, and how exciting is that? But there's this like whole layer of stress that lies underneath. Can you talk a little bit about that? Have you ever felt like the pressure or the stress from YouTube?
Oh, definitely. And it's something I try to think about a lot. Like a lot of the times I will look at my channel and look at the videos I've posted recently and think about, if I am someone who has only seen these videos, this is what I know about this person's life. And, when I think about it in the grand scheme of things, it's like people know nothing. They see nothing. They know nothing. It's like, they see 10 minutes of my entire week in a video, but in that 10 minutes, hours and hours and hours of work go into that. I'm sure how long it takes to film and edit and, come up with a concept and execute it and all that. So there's a lot that goes into it. And then, you do have a lot of stress on top of it on just trying to make sure you're representing yourself well and representing the hobby well. And, I think it can be really tough to balance because, especially for, people like myself who have a YouTube channel or an audience, it can be really hard to balance. Do you want to talk about the negative sides of the hobby or the negative experiences you have? Because, in a way, I think it's great to share things like that because other people can learn from them. We can just as a hobby learn from them and grow from them. And, you can prevent other people from making mistakes. But then at the same time, if you as a content creator makes a mistake and you publish it, it also gets scrutinized online and people will question you for things. And it does get very stressful.
Yeah, it is really interesting to think about the fact that the 10-minute video is a very insignificant part of your week, but for the viewer, it's 100% of your
everything.
week. Yeah, it's all they know. And it's so true. there's so much of a personal or private life that the viewers have no idea about, which is totally fine. They don't need to know all the private information, but it is funny the way that almost as a viewer, you kind of forget that. Like even I do that when I'm watching other people's YouTube channel. You sort of forget that their whole life is also there. That's just a tiny fraction of what they have to do in the day.
Yeah. And, you know, I even think about it when I'm looking at my own content and trying to kind of just understand what the viewers are seeing versus what I'm seeing, you know, even just looking at things like, okay, well, I posted this on Instagram, but not all of my YouTube followers follow me on Instagram. So only a small portion of them saw this. And I posted this on Twitter and this is here. And it does get confusing to kind of keep track of what people are seeing of your life, honestly.
Yes. And I've talked about this before, maybe I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast, but maybe, is when you create something, you don't really get to watch what you've created because it's almost impossible to perceive what it is you've made because you made it. So if you can't watch it, like I can't listen to my podcast as a viewer. It's just impossible for me.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's the same way for you with the videos.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and even, you know, I could go back and watch a video that I posted a year ago and I would still just be analyzing it. You know, I'd be thinking about the scenes that I cut from it and all these other things or how I could have done it better. So, you know, you really can't just watch your video the way that anyone else could.
Do you ever go back and watch old stuff? I find I cannot do that at all.
Not normally. No,
it's
very
so
rarely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is amazing how quickly the learning curve of being a content producer happens. It's like even you know, month to month, you can go back a couple months ago and go, why would I do that or phrase things that way or film things that way?
It makes me so sad because when I first started my YouTube channel and I was still like learning how everything worked, I didn't know that you could private videos. So I just deleted all of my old ones, but I always wish I could go back and see them.
Yeah. And you took a pretty significant break off of producing videos on YouTube, right? Which is a pretty big risk for those that don't have a channel. They don't know that, you know, YouTube really, they give you viewers and subscribers when you continue to produce content. As soon as you stop, they kind of shred your channel.
It's very scary if you know, especially if it's a source of income for you and you either choose to take a break or you have to take a break. And especially if you don't know like the duration of that or anything, it's scary because you just don't know what to expect when you come back, you know?
Yeah. But it seemed like the break did you well because you came back and, you know, the channel has been doing super well since you started producing videos again. Yeah.
Yeah. It was definitely a kind of rocky path because I guess my break that I took, it was sort of kind of just here and there, you know, there was a period of time where I would just not upload really, but then I would upload a video and then go 2 months and upload another one. So it was like not really a planned, like scheduled break or anything. So I just really had no idea what to expect coming back into it. And it was definitely kind of slow at first again, but then as I got back into it and I got back into making content more consistently, it started to pick back up again, thankfully.
So when you came back to it, did you have a mindset to go, I'm going to make consistent videos every week? Like I'm going back full tilt into this?
I tried to. I tried. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a funny business. And even one of the things that I find to be kind of annoying with producing content is it pulls me away from the animals themselves, which is kind of this strange dichotomy to be part of. You know, we're talking about improving animal care and improving welfare, and that conversation is taking me away from actually actively doing that. You know, it's like the podcast takes so much of my week. I want to do better with my animals, but then I have to talk about it's a very strange place.
Yeah. It is a strange place to exist. You
were also a zookeeper for a while. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so when I first moved to Ottawa, which I said was in September, October of 2019, I started working for a company that I'm sure many Canadians are familiar with, Little Rays. And I worked there from about October to kind of March, kind of throughout the summer. You know, the pandemic started in March and that's when things got weird. So sort of, I worked there for a couple months, we'll say.
And yeah, the Little Rays is basically, it's sort of like a Barcheck style zoo, right? They have, it's not a huge open air zoo like you would go to see, at a regular sort of city zoo, but it's more like an indoor reptile zoo.
Yeah, exactly. It's mostly focused on reptiles. It's not exclusively reptiles. There were a few other animals, but it is, I'd say, like 95% reptiles. So because of that, it is mostly an indoor facility. There is some outdoor stuff, but it's, mostly inside.
Do you have any animals that you worked with there that were some of your favorite experiences?
Yeah, I really loved working with the caimans, like the Cuvier's dwarf caimans. I worked with them quite a bit because I wasn't like a zookeeper who was, taking care of the animals and stuff all day. I did do some of that, but at the zoo, I was mostly an outreach staff. So I was the one, going to kids' birthday parties with the snakes and the caimans and all that stuff. And I was also their social media person. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't doing a lot of animal care. So the animals that I worked with were typically like the same group of animals. Because like I said, we were doing birthday parties and stuff. So we would have our show animals. So the caimans were definitely one of my favorites to work with. They were always great. I actually wasn't a big fan of working with the big snakes or anything. I feel like that's something that a lot of reptile keepers think would be so cool or look forward to. It's a lot of people's dream to either work with the big snakes or have a big snake or something, but I don't care for them. I don't care for the big snakes.
just because they're frustrating to work with is because they're so big and you're constantly managing them, or
yeah, they're big, they're heavy, you definitely hate them more when you have to carry them around everywhere. I'd say that's a big part of it because, we're going to 3 birthday parties a day and you're carrying around a 60-pound snake in a bin from house to house.
Yeah. It's like, much rather carry around the corn snake.
No. They're just too big for me.
Well, it is interesting to hear that. I didn't realize that was your role at that zoo. So that will tie in later in this conversation because of the future stuff that you're going to work with. So we'll definitely get there. But maybe for those who maybe aren't familiar with what you're keeping, could you run through just in general what you have as far as, you don't have to run through everything, but just give us the broad scope.
List off every single name. So I mostly keep lizards. I do keep a variety of reptiles and amphibians, but the majority of them are lizards and they're mostly smaller ones. I've never really been huge into the bigger species of reptile. I think that they're cool. I think they're fascinating, but they're just not something I care about owning. I way prefer the smaller guys. So I have a lot of geckos. I do keep some chameleons. And then, like I said, I do have snakes and stuff as well. Amphibians too are something that I have loved for a long time, but only more recently started getting into. So I do have a few amphibian species as well also.
Yeah, and I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, is trying to promote the keeping of smaller species just because of how much easier it is to ethically keep them and provide them lots of space. And is that kind of why you gravitate towards them, just because they're easier to manage?
I think so. And a lot of them I just find fascinating overall. I think a lot of times these smaller animals get overlooked by a lot of people in the hobby. And, that's fine. Everyone has their thing that they're into. But I do just think that the smaller guys get overlooked a lot. And, people, when it comes to reptiles, a lot of the times they appreciate the big things and the kind of scary things and stuff like that. But, I think a chameleon gecko is a great gecko. I love the little ones.
Yeah, exactly. Well, why don't we talk about a couple of these species? I definitely wanted to talk about the cat geckos.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that species and where you initially got interested in them and how you initially got that first, I think, pair or trio?
Yeah, so the cat geckos are a species that I've been working with and breeding now for about a year. I first was introduced to cat geckos in, I think, 2018, I want to say, when I was watching someone else's reptile collection here. So one of the guys I know here who's big into reptiles, he used to do a decent amount of traveling, and I would watch his collection for him when he was away. And so I was there, caring for his animals, and he had a few of the Malaysian cat geckos. And this was the first time I'd ever seen them. I don't think I'd ever seen them online or anything. And I just thought that they were super cool. They were very different from any other gecko I'd seen. They're not like a crested gecko or a leopard gecko or really any other gecko that I can think of. And just the way they moved was really fascinating. The way they looked, the way they felt, it was all just very interesting to me. So that's when I first became interested in them, although I didn't end up getting my first one until like 2 or 3 years later. And that's mostly just because they're not a species that's super easy to come by. You're not just walking into any pet store and finding cat geckos there. And even, people breeding them, there's not very many of them. So most of the ones you would see were just kind of random imports that came in, and you don't really know where they actually came from. So that's sort of just why I didn't have them for a while. But then about a year ago, I found someone on Kijiji who just had a female cat gecko that she had as a pet, and she was looking to rehome it. And that's when I got my first one. So I went and I got this gecko from her, who was originally a wild caught gecko, but then I got it from this woman who was rehoming her. So that's where my first one came from. And now I know I said earlier that, you can't normally just find them in the pet stores, but there's a pet store near me called Critter Jungle, which I actually worked at before I left Ottawa. And I knew that they had a cat gecko in the store because I'd kind of been eyeing it for the past few months. So after I got this female from Kijiji, I decided I was going to go to the store and check out if they had a male or a female. And I get there and they let me take a look at him, and he's a male. So I decided to get him. And then that's where my first pair came from. And then a few months later, once again, I found someone rehoming a female cat gecko on Kijiji. But this one was not just the female. She actually had 2 babies with her. So she was rehoming the female and her 2 babies that had just hatched. So I got those 3 geckos. And then as she was cleaning out the enclosure to get it ready for me, she found 4 more eggs in the soil. So she gave me the eggs as well. And that's sort of where my first babies came from.
Well, it's kind of nice because you did all that in Ottawa, and now that you're in Nova Scotia, the chances of finding a cat gecko on Kijiji is pretty much going to be impossible.
Yeah.
For those that are listening, Kijiji is our sort of Canadian Craigslist, and Nova Scotia has a much tinier population compared to Ottawa, which you have a lot of access to people.
I've been looking on Kijiji ever since I moved here, and it's like, one leopard gecko will get posted every few days, then maybe a crested gecko will pop up.
You're going to have to do some shipping if you want anything new.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing. See, when I used to live here, I had a decent amount of animals shipped to me. Then the entire time I lived in Ontario, I didn't get a single animal shipped to me. Everything was close enough that I could just go and get it.
Yeah.
And now that I'm back here, it's back to paying $150 for shipping every time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the cat geckos are a really interesting species because they sort of look like a amalgamation of different geckos in a way. Like they have very long legs and these strange like curly tails. And so can you talk a little bit about just the basic care for them?
Yeah, so the care for them, honestly, is really not that challenging. And I feel this way about a lot of reptiles, They're not really what I would consider a beginner species because they're sensitive, but their care needs are quite basic. And really, like, it's not a whole lot different from a crested gecko. Their diet is different and stuff, but as far as the actual setup goes, they are a semi-arboreal species. So really, like, the only difference from like my cat gecko setup compared to a crested gecko setup is that I'll do a bit more with the ground. I'll give them some hides on the ground, which, a crested gecko wouldn't use, but the cat geckos do. So I set it up similarly to a crested gecko setup, with lots of branches they can climb on, but then I also like to do something with the bottom. And as far as, actually setting up the enclosure, if you're comparing it to a crested gecko setup, I would just use some like thinner branches rather than, just like thick cork tubes and stuff, because they like having the thinner branches to climb on.
Yeah, because they're not like a adhesive toes or anything. They're just
they actually have retractable claws, which is really fascinating.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I guess that's where cat gecko comes from.
Yeah, like it's kind of weird how similar they actually are to cats.
Wow. And for feeding, is it mostly just crickets, or what are you feeding them?
Yeah, so they're insectivores, so they're not going to eat like a crested gecko diet or anything. Crickets are mostly what I feed them because these guys are also super reluctant to eat off of tongs or off of a bowl or anything. They're very shy. I mean, I hardly even see them. So they really just come out at night. So giving them things that they can hunt is great. Crickets are good, but isopods are a great one and oftentimes get overlooked, I think, as feeders for cat geckos because they're a big part of their natural diet and it helps provide them with a decent amount of calcium so cat geckos are interesting because they're very sensitive to minerals and such. You can't even use tap water for them. You have to use RO water because they're just so sensitive to the minerals. So I found that supplementing them is quite challenging because too much supplements and they start developing bladder stones. So even just supplementing them with calcium, I found to be a bit of a challenge. So giving them feeders like isopods that are already just high in calcium, I think is really great for them.
So are you dusting the crickets or do you do that very sparingly?
I do it very sparingly, and it's really been like an experiment. Like it's really been an experiment for me, especially with breeding them at the same time, because I started, and I was following a certain supplement schedule, but then I found that my female was having calcium stones, so I reduced supplements, but then her clutch of eggs was undercalcified. So it's definitely been a bit of a challenge trying to figure out the right balance.
Strike the balance. How did you diagnose the calcium stones in the bladder?
So it's really easy. They pass them, thankfully, but the risk is that what if they don't pass one? So you can see them and they do look really similar to urates, but if you know what you're looking for, there is a very clear difference because, one is it's a hard stone. If you pick it up and touch it, it feels like a rock. Whereas a normal urate wouldn't. So
yeah, it's more powdery.
Yeah.
And then temperature wise, are they more of a cooler species or?
Yep. Yeah. So I don't use any heat source on them. And honestly, like room temperature seems to be fine, but they could probably be a bit cooler.
And then humidity, they must be high humidity too then.
Yeah, so I do keep them with quite high humidity. I do it higher than like a crested gecko. I keep them more at like a constant around 80% with, a spike up to 100 when it gets misted. Whereas, the crested geckos, I'll let it dry out a bit more to like 60% before it gets misted again. But yeah, they like a lot of humidity, which is one of the, they're quite sensitive to that. Just moisture overall, they're fairly sensitive to. So I like to keep it fairly cool and humid. So I find they do really, really well in bioactive enclosures because just having the live plants and stuff in there really help to hold in the humidity. They hold in the moisture and just, provides them a lot of microclimates. So I pretty much exclusively keep my cat geckos in bioactives.
And there's a couple species of cat gecko, right? Is it just, or do you just have one?
So I did just have the one, but I actually just recently got a second one, which is really exciting. I have just been working with the A. felinis, and I just recently got 3 A. dorsalis. So I got them just about a month ago now through Ashley at Northern Lights. So these are 3 captive bred dorsalis babies that came from a breeder in Europe. So, they're really small right now. They're all less than 2 grams. So they're not going to be breeding anytime soon, but hopefully in the future, I'll be working with those also.
And visually, how different are those 2 species?
Their body looks about the same, they're the same shape and stuff, but their patterns are a bit different. And it's actually still being debated whether or not they're different species or just a subspecies. But most people that you ask who are working with them or breeding them will say that they should be different species. But so they look the same, like body shape wise and stuff, but the appearance or the pattern is what has the difference. The A. felinis have almost like spots and sort of, and it's hard to describe their pattern because it's not just like black spots and stuff here and there, but they have more of a spotted pattern where the A dorsalis, they typically just have like a white line down their back.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
And
they
as
do
far as
look quite similar, but there are visual differences.
yeah, the body shape is very similar.
Yeah.
As far as breeding goes, what have been some of the challenges there, or has it been relatively smooth going?
Yeah, so the breeding has gone really well. And from what I was when I was researching the breeding for them and, talking to other people and, just gathering information, I was seeing that, overall it can be fairly challenging. Not a lot of people have had success with it. And, there's not a whole lot known about their breeding process and stuff right now. So it's a lot of trial and error. So I wasn't, I didn't have super high hopes that it was going to work out great right from the start, especially because I've never really bred any other species of reptile before. But things worked out really well for me. So I put my pair Sadie and Slinky in an exoterra together. And I did give them quite a large exoterra since they were going to be cohabbing in there. So they were in a 24 by 18 by 24 enclosure that I set up completely bioactive, and I just left them be. They just coexisted in there, and I kept checking on them. And thankfully with the cat geckos, it's pretty easy to see the eggs developing inside of them. They're small. It's easy to kind of just look right through their bellies. So I was able to see that the eggs started developing. So because of that, I was able to kind of track their progress and get an idea of when they were going to be laid. And I happened to actually catch my female like in the act of laying her eggs. So it's pretty easy to keep track of. So yeah, everything went really well as far as just the actual breeding goes. Like I would say the only challenges I've really had were like the supplements, like I've mentioned, kind of trying to find the perfect balance there of calcium particularly. You don't want to give them too much that they're having the stones, but you want the eggs to be properly developed. So that's been a bit of a challenge. And also just learning how to care for the eggs was a bit of a challenge for me as well. Again, like I said, I've never bred any other reptiles before. So this is like my first time dealing with reptile eggs. And of course, it's a fairly sensitive species. So I did end up losing some of the eggs during the incubation process, but I don't really have any regrets about it because those few losses that I did have taught me how to do it properly. And now the eggs that I'm having are having way more success in the incubation process.
Are you incubating them at room temperature as well, or do you have them at a slightly elevated temperature?
Yeah, so I am incubating them at room temperature, and I've actually been doing some research and stuff about the incubation process with these guys because, again, not a whole lot is known, but there are some people who are believing that having a temperature fluctuation from day to night actually plays a role in the development of these guys, and that they benefit from having it cool down at night. And honestly, just by having them out in my reptile room, it's like perfect for that. My reptile room during the daytime is typically around 23 degrees Celsius, just in the air. And then at nighttime, it typically drops by, 2 degrees when the lights and stuff all shut off. So I've been having pretty good success just with having them out in the reptile room.
Yeah, you're not the first person to say that having a temperature fluctuation for incubating eggs is actually beneficial. And I forget what conversation I was having on the podcast before about the same thing. And it makes a lot of sense, of course, in nature that's going to happen.
And it's interesting, though, because, there are some species that the eggs are super sensitive to a temperature fluctuation, but then others seem to almost need it. Like, I haven't had success breeding my Parson's chameleons yet, but I've been attempting, and in the research and stuff I've done, the Parson's chameleons eggs literally need to go through a summer and a winter period to develop properly. So It is quite interesting. Yeah.
I definitely want to get onto them as well. I have a couple more questions about the cat geckos, because then we'll talk about the Parsons. Have you had any of the cat gecko eggs hatch yet? Or are they still incubated?
I have.
Oh, you have? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've had, So I had the 2 babies that I said came to me from the person who was rehoming them. And since then I have had 4 hatch.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what's your vision for your project here? Is that just to establish some captive bred cat geckos in Canada, or?
Yeah, pretty much. So like I said, I was fascinated with cat geckos like right as soon as I discovered them. And I just think that they are quite an underrated species. I think that they're very unique. They're really fascinating. And I do think that they make good pets for a lot of people. I wouldn't recommend them to someone as their very first reptile ever, unless they're dedicated to doing, the research and stuff that they need to. But just because of how sensitive they can be, they wouldn't be my first recommendation. But for, people who have a little bit of experience under their belt, I think that they make a really, really interesting species to keep. So I would just love to see more of that. I'd love to see more people keeping them, but, I don't want to see people just keeping a bunch of wild caught imports that are coming from who knows where and going through what sort of process. So I really want to, work to breed them, get captive born babies, and have those be, just great pets for people or other breeders for people. So that's sort of my main goal with that. Yeah.
What are you feeding the babies?
The babies, so again, they eat pretty much the same diet as the adults, just scaled down. So they eat like small pinhead crickets, and I size them up as they grow, and also just the isopods. So when I first started keeping the babies, I tried keeping them in a more, not necessarily like a empty sterile setup, but I had them in, they were on paper towel substrate, but they still had like fake plants and everything in there. And I found that just wasn't working very well. The babies weren't growing very fast. The growth was super, super, super slow. So I decided to move them into like mini bioactives where they could have isopods and stuff. And I found by doing that, their growth picked up because I think they were, eating more regularly. They were getting the isopods and just hunting whenever they wanted rather than, only getting fed when I feed them. So that made a big difference. So I really, the isopods really work well. So the babies mostly eat like dwarf white isopods, dwarf purple isopods, and then like pinhead crickets. I have tried giving them even like smaller prey, sometimes like fruit flies and stuff, just to see if they have any interest. And I've never really seen any interest from them in anything, that isn't really the isopod or crickets.
Yeah, well, I'm sure in the wild when they hatch, of course, they're so small. They may spend a huge portion of their day basically grazing on little bugs that they find. And so it's probably one of those things where in the captivity, we always think, okay, you feed everything once a day. Well, maybe they need to eat like 5 times a day. Who knows?
And they were growing so slow. I mean, overall, they're not a fast growing species. They're not like a leopard gecko that, will almost be adult size by the time they're 8 months old. These guys really slow, but some of the babies, they were staying at 2 grams for 3 months with barely any growth. But then once I moved them into the more like bioactive style setup, they seem to be doing a lot better like that.
So let's move on to the Parsons, because as you said at the beginning, you like to keep smaller animals, except for you have these Parsons, so they are large species. So how did you get into keeping them?
They're kind of my exception to the small, all the small ones, because they are debatably the largest species of chameleon that we know of. It's debatable if a Mellor's is larger. Basically, Parsons chameleons are the heaviest, but Mellor's chameleons get a bit longer. So you can debate which one's bigger, but either way, they're big. So they actually have a very similar story to my cat geckos. The same guy, Justin, whose animals who I watched, he had a pair of Parsons chameleons. So he had a pair of orange eyes. So it's actually a different locale than what I have, but they're the same species. So that is also where I first got introduced to Parsons chameleons. And I just thought that they were incredible. And, I started learning more about them and just seeing more about them in like chameleon groups and stuff, because especially for a long time, I was very active in like the chameleon community on Facebook and stuff. And, I just see a lot of people talking about them and posting about theirs and stuff. And I just got really interested in them. Again, even though I normally like the smaller ones, there was just something about the Parson's chameleons that just really interested me. And I think part of it is honestly their personality. I'm sure a lot of people who listen to the podcast are familiar with chameleons and are familiar with the fact that they're not normally the nicest animals out there, which, Parson's chameleons, it's not like they're super friendly or anything, but a lot of people would consider them like the gentle giants of the chameleon world. So they're very interesting to me, and they have a lot of personality, and I can tell, that they're quite intelligent. So I really, really love the Parson's chameleons. And then I had the opportunity. Sorry?
How many do you have? Just a pair, or do you have more than that?
I just have the pair, and it is something, I love them. I think that they're incredible. I would consider getting another pair in the future if I had the space and stuff, but only if I have success breeding my current pair. Because they're one of those animals that, not many people are breeding, especially here in Canada. I don't think anyone has bred them. I might be wrong, but to my knowledge, no one in Canada has bred them before. So if you're getting a Parson's chameleon, it is pretty much going to, again, here in Canada, is going to be wild caught. And, I'm not totally against wild caught animals. I think that they are important for a lot of things, such as breeding purposes and bloodlines and stuff. But I don't want to just go out and get a bunch of wild caught chameleons if I don't even know if I can breed them, So I have my first pair. I'm going to give that a go. Hope I have success. And if I do have success, then maybe I would consider another pair.
And how did you get the pair? Did Ashley bring those in for you as well, or?
So these ones came through Edgar at Chameleons Canada. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so, let's talk a little bit about the breeding right now. Actually, before we do that, why don't we talk about the enclosures you have them in? And I don't know if they're reset up in their new enclosures, but I know at your old space, you had built pretty massive enclosures, but they didn't fit. You couldn't take them with you.
Yeah, that was, I sort of expected it, but it was definitely really disappointing. So back earlier this year, it was, I think February, I started building them their enclosures. So I started this in February, and it took me about 2 months to complete. And now I definitely could have done it faster, but at my old place, I was very limited on the space that I had to work with when I was building things. So it was just really hard to kind of work around that and find the time and stuff to just make time for it. But it took me about 2 months to complete. And these enclosures were 6 feet tall, they're 5 feet wide, and 3 feet deep. And so that was the whole unit. Now the enclosure itself was only 4 feet tall, and then it was on a 2 foot tall stand. Mm-hmm. So the whole unit was 6 feet tall, but the actual enclosure was 4 foot. So I built those all. I used them for quite a while. They worked really well. And
you did a great job on them, by the way.
Thank
really,
you.
Really good job. Yeah.
I'm really happy with how they turned out. And then it came time to move, and the plan, I knew they weren't going to fit out of the house as is. Like I said, they're 6 by 5 by 3. They're not fitting out my basement door, that's for sure. So I knew they were going to have to be taken apart, which I was fine with doing, but I didn't account for, I guess I didn't leave myself enough time. I didn't have the proper tools to do it. By the time I got around to dealing with this chameleon enclosure, it was about 3 a.m, the day before we were leaving to move.
Oh my God.
So I tried for about an hour, and then I decided that it was not worth it. I knew if I was going to take these enclosures apart, it was going to take me at least 8 hours to do it, and it just was not worth it. So I just gave up, and I left them behind and accepted that I was going to have to build brand new ones as soon as I got here. Now, thankfully, my friend Justin, who's the one who introduced me to the Parson's chameleons, he offered to, he kept my chameleons for me for about a week. So when I first moved, the chameleons went to him. He kept them for a week, so I had some time to get their new enclosures built and ready. So really thankful for that, because if I didn't have someone to watch them, like, I don't know. I don't know what I would have done then.
So did you build basically a carbon copy of what you had in Ottawa?
Basically, but I made it bigger this time. So the new ones I built are now a foot taller. So they're 7 feet tall total.
Wow.
Yeah.
And did you leave the old ones intact where they were? Like, did you still have to take them apart? I'm not sure if you were in a house or what.
Yeah, so my old place was a townhouse. So my old animal room was just the entire basement pretty much. And yeah, we just had to leave them down there. I took them apart as much as I could. You know, I saved some of the pieces to reuse, but it was hardly anything in the grand scheme of it. It was like, I think we ended up reusing maybe like 3 pieces of wood. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that they're all set back up and they have a little more space. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about actually trying to breed them? Have you paired them yet, or are you still working towards that?
Yeah, so they have been paired before. The first time I paired them, it was not really, it wasn't something I necessarily planned on doing that year, because so typically to breed them, they need to kind of go through a cool down during the winter, like a lot of reptiles do. And it was just not something that I was equipped to do that year. So I wasn't able to put them through a cool down this first year. So I wasn't planning on trying to breed them, but I just decided might as well put them together and see what happens, you know. Worst that's going to happen is nothing. So I took Felix and I put him into Fiona's enclosure, and just right away I was mind blown because he started head bobbing at her and just like all of the signs that you want to see right away. And they ended up staying together for 2 months before I separated them. And I was really hopeful that they successfully bred, but I never ended up getting eggs or anything. So it was not successful this past year, but I'm hoping that, you know, going forward, I'll be able to cool them down, and hopefully that will help, because it was really frustrating because the signs that I saw last year was like so promising. I was speaking to other breeders and stuff, and it was just like, it's so disappointing that it didn't work out, because everything went right, you know? Mm-hmm. And there was like not even a moment of question of what was going on. You know, they never had any issue being together. Like typically if you put them together and the female's not receptive, she's gonna let you know right away.
Yeah.
So it was really disappointing that nothing came out of that, but it does leave me hopeful that, you know, going forward that they will hopefully have success in the future.
Well, and I guess if they require a temperature cool down, there could be some biological things that happen, like follicular growth,
exactly,
or spermatogenesis and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so how are they in the same room as other reptiles that you keep, or how are you going to cool them down?
Yeah, it is challenging, you know, especially with indoor keeping, because most of the people who I know who have had success breeding Parson's chameleons they live somewhere that they can keep them outside like year round. You know, a lot of these people live in Southern California, where they put your Parson's chameleon outside and there you go. It's taken care of. The weather there is perfect for them. So it is really difficult indoors. You know, you have to play around with just equipment that you have, like fans, foggers, things like that. I've actually been pretty surprised in the temperature drops I've been able to achieve just by using like computer fans combined with misting systems and foggers, because the combination of the air with just the water, I find really cools it down more than I expected it would.
Yeah, well, I guess you're making essentially an air conditioning in there by forcing evaporation, so that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I guess you could probably get it down quite cold, especially, I mean, the nice thing in Canada is it gets quite cold outside, so you can just tinker with the heat a little bit and get a...
That's the thing too. I even, in my new place now, the room that my animals are in, you know, they're in the garage actually, is one of, you know, not this room here, but my other animal room is the garage that has been turned into an animal room. And so one end of the room is a garage door. So it's not very insulated over there. The other end of the room has the furnace room in it. So that end of the room stays quite a bit warmer, whereas the other end of the room by the door actually cools down quite a bit. So I actually put my Parson's chameleons by the door because it just stays a more comfortable temperature for them there. And we are going to be completely temperature controlling the garage before summertime, because we will need air conditioning down there. But right now in October, we don't need that. So
yeah, and in the winter, it doesn't get super, super cold in Nova Scotia, does it? Like you guys don't have spikes down. Yeah,
it was a big shock to me when I was in Ottawa and it was minus 40 degrees.
yeah.
Because here, most of the winters, even during the day, I'd say it's above, whereas
above freezing?
A lot of daytimes will be 1, 2, 3 degrees, and then the nighttime it drops below freezing. So it's just a lot of freezing and thawing here all the time.
Oh my gosh,
the roads, they freeze overnight, they thaw out in the day, and then everything's a gross slushy mess, and then it freezes over again. So
yeah, I see. I'd rather when things just freeze rock solid for 4 months. You don't have to deal with the slush, but you guys get a tremendous amount of snow too that we don't get.
Yeah, so it's messy here during the winter. That's for sure.
It will work keeping them near the door, and they're not going to hit that minus 30 where they're not going to have cold spikes. And like
they're by the door, but I don't want it to sound like it's this like old drafty door or anything. It's just slightly cooler on that end of the room.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you're able to breed them. That will be really fascinating. Then you'll have kind of 2 species, which I think you'll probably be one of the first people in Canada to actually be breeding them.
Yeah, I know there are a few people working with the cat geckos, which is really good. It's nice that I'm not the only one. It's nice that there are other people out there who, I can potentially, trade bloodlines with and stuff. And just, it's nice to see other people working with them. But as far as the Parson's chameleons go, there's not really anyone else out there so far. I do know of other people who have pairs of them and are working to breed with them. But again, like I said, I don't know of anyone who's had success so far.
Mm-hmm. So. Well, hopefully you'll be the first. That'll be great.
It would be. I hope so.
Why don't we wrap up with your new project, your new business venture that you are launching? That's part of the reason why you moved back to Nova Scotia. So why don't you run through that?
Yeah, so sometime in the near future, I don't have any exact dates or anything yet, but I'm going to be starting up my own animal education business, but it is going to be more than just that. The animal education business, it's going to be things just like kind of what I was doing before with birthday parties, take the animals out to shows, events, bookings, whatever, and teach people about them, show them, it's always great. I love doing those because, so many people who have never really seen reptiles or maybe even don't like reptiles and stuff, they become interested in them and, they learn to appreciate them. And it's always just great doing that. So that's something I really want to start up here and do again because I miss doing things like that. And here in Nova Scotia, hardly anything exists in terms of the animal industry. There's not a whole lot of things to do in the animal world around here. There's a small private zoo and stuff, but it's more of a petting zoo and things like that. So I really want to start something up like that around here, but I don't want it to just be a local thing. I want to create something that anyone anywhere can enjoy. So along with the education business, I guess, I'm also starting up a virtual animal center. So it's basically going to be, you could kind of call it an online zoo.
Wow,
and
that's cool.
This is something I got the idea to do actually while I was working at a zoo during the pandemic. And, the zoo industry, especially, I'm sure a lot of places were hit very hard by the pandemic, but the zoo industry, especially here in Canada, was hit really hard. A lot of zoos over the country started closing. When I was working, at Little Ray's, we were getting new animals in all the time because other zoos around Canada were closing and they were having to send their animals places. So we were taking in all of these new animals from the zoos. So, and I saw a lot of them trying to figure out ways that they can operate virtually and do things like that, and, still have people interested and engaged and stuff. So just seeing all of that and, kind of experiencing it because, I was working there at the time, it just really gave me the idea to do something completely online. And, I'd never really seen anything like that before. So along with the just local education business, I'm also going to be having a complete virtual animal center.
That is really interesting. I think that is something that we need right now for that exact reason, and people will be very receptive to that idea. So how have you laid this out in your mind, how that's going to work? You're going to have a space, obviously, to move your animals to?
So right now I'm, kind of doing it out of the house. And, one of the big perks of this new place is I have the space to do that. This room that I'm in right now is, it's what I call my lizard lounge. So this is sort of it's like my personal room, this room here has my breeders and stuff in it, like my cat geckos are here, like my dart frogs and stuff. So basically animals that I don't think would be good education animals. I'm not going to be bringing my poison dart frogs around to kids' birthday parties and having them touch them and stuff. So this room here kind of just became like my personal space. And then downstairs, I have the space to set up for my business. So all of the education animals and stuff are all downstairs. So it's really nice that I can kind of keep it separate. And, just have my personal pets and projects separate from my business. So that's how we have it set up here. I'd love to in the future, if I'm able to, I'd love to expand and, have a place that people could come and visit. But right now it's, operating out of my house and I don't really want a bunch of people here. So it's going to be online and, the outreach that we do.
So how do you visualize the online virtual aspect working with that? Do you have cameras set up or what is that?
So it's going to be more so something that, we put together. So I want it to be kind of like a zoo, in the aspect where, there's the animals, and I'll have photos of them, videos of them. If we can set up like live streams and stuff, that would be really cool for certain things, with text blurbs about them, video blurbs about them, and basically just having that for all of the animals so that even though it's all just online, it's still very, you're not just scrolling, looking at pictures. I want it to be very engaging and interesting and, educational if you want it to be. But if you also just want to scroll and look at animals, then you can.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I'm really looking forward to seeing that develop. I'm sure you're just in the process of beginning it. So a lot of work is ahead.
I've been working on the website. So again, I hope that it's, ready at some point within the next few months. It would be awesome to have it, kind of up and going before the new year. So
I think you have a name for it. You were sharing the logos and whatnot on Instagram. What's the name?
So the company name is Beyond the Wild or Beyond the Wild Animal Center. I haven't officially registered it yet, so I don't know which one is the official one yet, but...
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll all be watching for that, and I'm sure you'll have updates on the YouTube channel and whatnot. So that's great. I think anything that we can do from the herpetoculture hobby to move into education and educating people who aren't necessarily in the hobby about these animals and also helps conservation as well.
And see, that's something that I really enjoyed when I was working like at Little Rays with the zoo, because, here kind of in the pet world, in the reptile community, a lot of the times, we almost forget that like normal people exist who don't know anything about animals or reptiles, because we're so used to talking to each other and, all these other people who know things. Whereas when I was at the zoo, a lot of the, a lot of the people who were coming in, a lot of the shows that I was doing and just, a lot of the people I met, they knew almost nothing about animals. They just knew that they liked them. And so it's always really awesome getting to, introduce those people to the animals and teach them about it. So I really want to, kind of target that client base as well. Whereas, a lot of my YouTube videos and stuff are more so targeted towards people who are already in the animal world,
Yes.
So
yeah, that's a great point.
It's very separate.
Yeah. And there is such a big disconnect between people who are in the hobby, like you said, and people who aren't.
Yeah.
Bridging that gap will be, I'm sure it's very rewarding as well, like you said. So
yeah,
that's awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything we wanted to cover today. Is there anything that we left out that you wanted to mention before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think that's about it.
I think we hit everything. Well, Emma, I really appreciate you taking the time. This was a fantastic chat. Can you let everybody know where they can find information about yourself online?
Yeah, definitely. So you can find me online most places. So my YouTube channel is Emma Sampson. I would say that's where I'm most active. Definitely my main social media platform, but then I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, which is all just at MSAM99. So you can check those out. And yeah, like I said, my business Beyond the Wild will hopefully be up within the next few months. So definitely keep an eye out for that as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Emma. This was a fantastic chat.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I had a great time.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Emma, thank you so much for joining me on that episode. I had a blast chatting with you, and as I said, I'm so excited to see how your business evolves over time, and I can't wait to see what you get up to in the future. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. If you did enjoy this episode, the easiest thing you can do to support the show is A, subscribe on the YouTube channel, help us get over to the next maybe 20,000 barrier, and B, share it. Share it on social media, Facebook, Instagram. That is a huge help. If you are interested in joining us on Patreon, head to patreon.com/animalsathome. There you find early access to the episodes, and we also do Zoom Hangouts every once a month or so with the listeners. That's a lot of fun. So if you do want to participate in that, that is the place to do that. Thank you so much to CustomReptileHabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. And as always, if you're looking for more information on this podcast or any other podcast on the Animals at Home network, head to animalsathome.network.com. I will catch you guys not next Sunday, but the Sunday after. Remember, there's not going to be an episode next week, but we will follow up with normal programming after the 1 week gap. I'll see you then.